What happens when a billionaire goes undercover in his own factory and discovers a desperate secret? Nathan Reed had everything: money, power, and an empire that bore his name. As the CEO of Reed Industries, his factories produced some of the most in-demand products in the world. But despite the success, something had changed. In the beginning, Nathan knew every corner of his company. He shook hands with employees, walked the factory floors, and listened to their struggles. But as the business grew, so did the distance between him and the workers who kept it running. Reports and spreadsheets told him the company was thriving, but could numbers really show the truth? One evening, as he reviewed yet another report from his top executives, a thought struck him. When was the last time I actually spoke to one of my factory workers? He didn't have an answer. Determined to see his company from the ground level, Nathan made a bold decision. He would go undercover as a regular factory worker. No bodyguards, no executive meetings, no special treatment. Just a name tag, a uniform, and a chance to experience the reality his employees faced every day. The next morning, he arrived at one of his largest factories, dressed in worn-out jeans and a simple gray work shirt. The air was thick with the scent of oil and metal, machines hummed rhythmically, and workers moved with practiced efficiency. No one looked twice at him. The factory manager, a stern man named Bill, barely glanced at Nathan's application before handing him a helmet and pointing toward the assembly line. No slacking off. We run a tight ship here. Nathan smirked. Understood. As he stepped onto the factory floor, he wasn't sure what he would find, but something in his gut told him this wasn't just going to be about quality control. He was about to discover a truth that would change everything. Nathan adjusted his helmet and stepped into the heart of the factory. The moment he crossed the threshold, he was hit with the overwhelming noise of machinery, the rhythmic clanking of metal, and the constant hum of conveyor belts moving parts from one end of the massive building to the other. The air was thick with the scent of grease, steel, and sweat. Workers in faded uniforms moved swiftly between stations, their faces a mix of exhaustion and focus. Some of them had dark circles under their eyes. Others had calloused hands, proof of long hours spent handling heavy equipment. This wasn't an easy job. Nathan had spent his life in boardrooms, signing deals, approving factory expansions, ensuring profits continued to soar. But in that moment, as he watched the relentless pace of the workers, he felt something he hadn't in years: guilt. "Hey, newbie, move it," a voice snapped. Nathan turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered worker, probably in his late 40s, with rough hands and a tired face. His name tag read Mike. "We don't have time for daydreaming. Grab those parts and load them onto the belt." Nathan nodded, quickly stepping into place. He reached for a heavy metal component, but the weight caught him off guard. It was much heavier than it looked. He stumbled slightly before managing to lift it onto the conveyor. Mike scoffed. "You'll toughen up, or you won't last the week." Nathan forced a chuckle. "I'll manage." But within the first 2 hours, he realized how brutal this job truly was. The heat from the machines made the air stifling. The repetitive motion of lifting, turning, and assembling sent a sharp ache through his lower back and arms. During his break, he slumped onto a bench, wiping sweat from his brow. That's when he noticed someone sitting alone in the far corner of the break area. A younger worker, probably in his late 20s, sat hunched over, elbows resting on his knees. He had short, dark brown hair, sunken eyes, and an expression of deep exhaustion. Unlike the others, who chatted or scrolled through their phones, this man stared blankly at the floor, lost in thought. Something about him stood out. Nathan nudged Mike. "Who's that?" Mike barely looked up. "That's Daniel. Hardest worker here. Never complains. But something's off about him." Nathan frowned. "What do you mean?" Mike shrugged. He stays late almost every night, skips meals, never talks about his personal life. Rumor is he's got serious problems outside of work. Nathan narrowed his eyes. He had come here expecting to find flaws in factory management, maybe some inefficiencies in production. He hadn't expected to find a man drowning in silent suffering. And something told him he needed to know why. The next few days followed the same exhausting routine. Nathan arrived early, worked the assembly line, and tried to blend in. But no matter how much he observed, one thing remained unchanged: Daniel's strange behavior. While other workers took their short breaks, Daniel stayed busy. He skipped meals, avoided conversations, and was always the last to leave. If anyone asked him to join them for lunch, he would brush them off with a forced smile and say, "Not hungry." But Nathan saw through the act. Daniel wasn't just quiet. He was struggling. One evening, as the shift ended, Nathan noticed something unusual. While most workers rushed to clock out, Daniel lingered near his station, carefully watching everyone leave. Once the factory was nearly empty, he slipped into a darkened corner of the warehouse, glancing over his shoulder before disappearing through a side door. Nathan's instincts flared. Something wasn't right. Instead of heading out, he waited a few minutes, then quietly followed. The side door led to a narrow hallway that opened into a storage area filled with crates and metal shelves. The only light came from a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Nathan kept his distance, watching as Daniel pulled out his phone, his hands trembling. Then he heard it. "Please, I'm begging you. I just need a little more time." Nathan's stomach twisted. Daniel's voice was low, desperate, almost broken. "I swear I'll pay. I just need another week." A long pause. Nathan could hear muffled shouting from the other end of the call. Daniel clenched his jaw, shutting his eyes as if trying to keep himself together. "No, please, don't do this. She's just a kid." Nathan's breath caught. This wasn't just about money. Daniel was fighting for someone else. As the call ended, Daniel lowered his phone, his shoulders sagging. For a moment, he just stood there, silent and defeated. Nathan had seen enough. This wasn't just another worker with financial troubles. This was a man drowning in something far worse. And whatever it was, Nathan needed to find out. Nathan barely slept that night. Daniel's desperate plea echoed in his mind. She's just a kid. Who was he talking about? His daughter? A younger sibling? And more importantly, who was threatening him? The next day, Nathan arrived at the factory determined to find answers. But he knew one thing. If he confronted Daniel directly, the man would shut down. No one who hid their pain so well would simply open up to a stranger. Instead, he watched. Throughout the shift, Nathan noticed the same patterns. Daniel worked twice as hard as anyone else. He took on extra tasks without being asked. He avoided personal conversations like they were landmines. And every now and then, Nathan caught a flicker of fear in his eyes, like a man constantly looking over his shoulder. But the biggest clue came at the end of the shift. As the workers left, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. Nathan saw him carefully count the cash inside, his fingers gripping the bills tightly. His expression was unreadable, but there was something heartbreaking about the way he held that money, like it was both a lifeline and a curse. Nathan knew that look. It was the look of someone who had already lost too much and couldn't afford to lose anything more. Without thinking, Nathan stepped closer. "Long day," Daniel stiffened, quickly shoving the envelope into his pocket. "Yeah, same as always." Nathan pretended not to notice. "You stay late a lot." Daniel forced a short laugh. "Yeah, well, overtime pays the bills." Nathan tilted his head. "You got a family to take care of?" For the first time, Daniel hesitated. His jaw tightened. Then he sighed. "My little sister. She's all I've got." Nathan felt a pang in his chest. "That's why you take every extra shift." Nathan asked, keeping his voice neutral. Daniel nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. She's sick. Medical bills don't pay themselves. There it was. The truth. But before Nathan could respond, Daniel added something that made his blood run cold. And if I don't pay soon, we're going to lose everything. Nathan didn't know what made him angrier. The fact that one of his employees was suffering this much, or the fact that he had never noticed before. One thing was clear, Daniel was running out of time. And Nathan wasn't going to let that happen. Nathan had faced high-stakes situations before, multi-million-dollar deals, last-minute mergers, market crashes. But none of it compared to the urgency that burned inside him now. Daniel's little sister was sick. Medical bills were drowning him, and time was running out. Nathan knew that money wasn't the real issue. Access to help was. His company was worth billions. One phone call, and he could wipe out Daniel's debt in seconds. But if he just handed Daniel the money, would he even accept it? No. Nathan needed a different approach. He spent the next day researching his own company. How much were his factory workers actually paid? What kind of healthcare benefits did they have? The answers made him sick. On paper, everything looked competitive. But in reality, it wasn't enough. How many more Daniels were out there, struggling in silence? That night, Nathan made a decision. He couldn't fix the entire system overnight, but he could save one family, and he knew exactly how to do it. The next morning, as the shift ended, Nathan watched as Daniel once again pulled out the white envelope, counting his cash. But this time, his hands were shaking. Nathan didn't need to guess why. Daniel was short. He didn't have enough. And whatever deadline he was facing, it was today. Taking a deep breath, Nathan stepped forward. "Hey, I know a guy," he said casually. Daniel looked up, confused. "What?" "A friend of mine runs an emergency fund for workers in tough spots. He's helped a lot of people. No strings attached." Daniel scoffed. "Yeah, right. Nobody helps for free." Nathan met his gaze. Maybe some people do. For the first time, Daniel hesitated, because a part of him wanted to believe. And that was all Nathan needed. "Come with me." Daniel hesitated, glancing between Nathan and the factory exit. He looked torn. He had spent so long relying only on himself, fighting alone, that the idea of accepting help felt wrong. "I don't know, man," he muttered. Nathan kept his voice steady. "You said you're out of options. What do you have to lose?" Daniel swallowed hard. Then, slowly, he nodded. They left the factory together, stepping into the crisp night air. Nathan led him toward a quiet office building nearby, one of the administrative offices tied to the factory. Inside, a woman at the front desk greeted them with a warm smile. "He's here for assistance," Nathan said simply. She nodded, pulling out a file. "We'll take care of everything. Medical expenses, overdue bills, whatever is needed." Daniel froze. "Wait, just like that?" The woman smiled. "Yes. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. This company believes in taking care of its workers." Daniel's eyes darted between her and Nathan. It didn't make sense. No paperwork, no meetings, no hoops to jump through. Who even runs this program?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Nathan exhaled, keeping his expression neutral. "Does it matter?" Daniel stared at him, struggling to process everything. Then, slowly, he whispered, "No, I guess it doesn't." For the first time in a long time, he let his guard down. And for the first time, he wasn't alone. Days passed, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt like he could breathe. The hospital called. His sister's medical bills had been cleared. The past due notices on his rent? Gone. The weight that had been crushing him for months had suddenly vanished. He tried to understand how it had happened so fast. The program Nathan mentioned seemed too good to be true. No endless paperwork. No rejection letters. No condescending speeches about working harder. Just help. Pure and simple. At the factory, Daniel had changed. He no longer avoided people. He took his breaks. He ate his meals. He wasn't afraid to exhale. One evening, as the shift ended, he found himself sitting with Nathan outside the factory, watching the parking lot clear out. "So," Nathan said casually, "how's your sister?" Daniel smiled. A real smile, not the tired, forced one he used to wear. "Better. She's getting the care she needs." Nathan nodded. "Good. You deserve that peace of mind." Daniel hesitated, then said something that had been weighing on him. "I don't get it, man. I spent months begging for help. Banks, charities, government programs. Nobody gave a damn." He exhaled sharply. "And then, out of nowhere, this fund just saves my life." Nathan shrugged. "Guess you just got lucky." Daniel narrowed his eyes, because something about that answer felt off. A week later, Daniel was sitting in the factory break room when something on the TV caught his eye. A live press conference. The screen showed a well-dressed man, seated at a sleek table, microphones in front of him. He looked powerful, composed. The news ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Reed Industries CEO announces major changes to worker benefits." Daniel barely paid attention until the camera zoomed in on the CEO's face. And suddenly, his world tilted. It was Nathan, the man he had worked alongside, the man who had helped him, the man who had saved his sister's life. Daniel's heart pounded as Nathan's voice filled the room. "No company can succeed if its workers are struggling. That's why I've implemented a new emergency assistance fund, because no one should have to choose between their job and their family." Daniel felt his breath hitch. Nathan hadn't just helped him. He had changed the entire system. The broadcast ended, and Daniel just sat there, stunned. A memory flashed in his mind. Nathan's careful words, the way he had always steered the conversation away from details. "Guess you just got lucky." No, it was never luck. It was him. And for the first time in his life, Daniel realized there were people out there who truly cared.